Chapter 1. The General's Command. The night draped Eastbridge in a shroud of mist so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. Lanterns cast trembling pools of golden light on the slick cobblestones, reflecting in puddles formed from the day's rain. The smell of smoke lingered, clinging to the edges of the town like a ghost, mingling with the faint scent of damp earth and the faint metallic tang of war. The clatter of hooves echoed distantly against empty streets, a sound that might have brought reassurance under other circumstances, but tonight it only sharpened the tension threading through every alleyway. General Alaric Blackthorne walked through it all with measured steps, the weight of his authority pressing down on him like armor. His tall frame cut an imposing figure, shoulders squared, chest broad. Even beneath the grime and sweat of campaigning, he moved with the precision of a predator surveying territory. His uniform, once a crisp emblem of pride, now bore the dust and smudges of battle. Gold braids hung dull against his chest, leather boots scuffed, the crimson sash across his torso frayed at the edges. He carried the appearance of a man who had weathered countless storms, and yet in his sharp, storm-cloud eyes there was a shadow of unease. Alaric's mind, ever meticulous in planning battle strategies and troop movements, was distracted. A single thought clawed at him, unbidden and unwelcome. Evelina Hart. He remembered her vividly from earlier that day in the marketplace. She had stood her ground when the soldiers had tried to intimidate her, chin lifted, lips curving into that infuriating smirk. She was no delicate creature to be coddled. Her strength was raw, her defiance fearless, and those sapphire eyes, they seemed to strip him bare, reading through the layers of authority and steel he had built around himself. A man like Alaric, accustomed to commanding obedience, had no room for being challenged, yet Evelina had done so effortlessly. The Blue Lantern Tavern came into view, its wooden sign swinging lazily in the wind, creaking like a mournful hymn. Smoke and the smell of roasting meat curled from the doorway, mixing with the damp night air. Alaric pushed open the door, the warmth of the fire and chatter of patrons washing over him, though he barely noticed it. His focus was fixed on her. Evelina was behind the counter, polishing mugs with deliberate care, though the movements did little to mask the tension in her shoulders. Stray strands of chestnut hair had escaped her pins, brushing against her cheek with a softness that contradicted the fire in her gaze. The room fell silent for a heartbeat as her eyes met his, sharp and unwavering. "You," Alaric said, low and commanding, the authority in his voice slicing through the ambient hum. Evelina raised a brow, lips curving into a teasing smile. "And who will enforce it, General? You?" He stepped closer, boots clicking against the worn wooden floor, closing the distance between them with deliberate intent. There was a storm in his eyes tonight, a mixture of authority, curiosity, and something far less controllable. "You may find yourself sharing my quarters tonight," he said, voice measured and firm, each word a command. "One night, no excuses." Her laugh was soft, melodic, daring. It hung in the air like a bell of defiance, echoing against the walls. "You can try, General," she said, setting the mug down, "but I warn you, I don't follow orders easily." Alaric's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him not with fear, but with challenge, and it stirred something unfamiliar, a mixture of irritation, intrigue, and a dangerous curiosity he couldn't suppress. His gaze lingered on her, taking in the fire in her stance, the subtle tremor in her hands that belied vulnerability, the raw beauty in every defiant line of her face. Evelina, for her part, felt the shift in the room. The commanding presence that normally inspired dread instead made her pulse race in a way she hadn't anticipated. There was danger in him, yes, but also a magnetism that tugged at her carefully maintained barriers. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and met his gaze. She refused to show fear, even as her heart betrayed her, skipping beats and twisting in unexpected anticipation. Alaric's eyes swept the room, noting the sudden silence of the patrons, their whispered conversations stilled under his commanding presence. He was used to obedience, to fear, yet he found himself caught in an uncharacteristic hesitation. This woman, she's like fire, and fire can consume everything if you're not careful. The room seemed to contract around them. The crackle of the fire, the creak of the sign outside, the distant hooves on cobblestones, all faded into insignificance. Time itself seemed to slow as they measured each other, evaluating strengths, weaknesses, and unspoken possibilities. Finally, Alaric broke the tension, his voice softer, almost imperceptibly so. "Do not mistake my command for cruelty," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am merely insisting on safety for both of us." Evelina's smirk softened into a reluctant smile. "Safety or control?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, yet teasing, challenging, probing. Alaric's hand brushed against the counter, close to hers, but he did not move closer, though the air seemed charged with the possibility. For the first time in years, he felt unsettled, vulnerable, in a way a man of war rarely allows himself to feel. Outside, the fog drifted like a living entity, curling around the inn, seeping through the cracks in the wooden walls. Inside, a silent storm had begun, invisible but undeniable. The tension between them was electric, impossible to ignore, as if the night itself had conspired to force two fierce, stubborn hearts into collision. Alaric's jaw clenched, a rare, private thought forming in his mind, raw and unguarded. This woman, she might be the only war I cannot win. Evelina, meanwhile, straightened, feeling the weight of his gaze and the undercurrent of something far more complicated than anger or authority. A dangerous man, she thought, but perhaps not untouchable. And so, as the night deepened and the lanterns outside flickered in the fog, the first thread of their story, defiance against command, fire against steel, was woven. A storm had begun, one that would sweep through Eastbridge and the hearts of two unlikely adversaries, leaving nothing unchanged in its wake. Chapter 2, A Night to Remember. The fire in General Alaric Blackthorn's quarters cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and wood polish, a stark contrast to the wet, misty streets of Eastbridge outside. A single lantern swayed gently, sending flickers of light across the heavy furniture, revealing ornate carvings that seemed both grand and austere. The bed, large and imposing with its carved posts and thick blankets, dominated the room, a silent reminder of the command he had given Evelina. Evelina stood near the door, her posture stiff, back straight, chin high, though her sapphire eyes betrayed a storm of curiosity and trepidation. The thought of sharing a room with the infamously commanding general made her pulse quicken in ways she wasn't entirely prepared to understand. And yet there was a strange thrill in standing here, in the quiet intimacy forced upon them by circumstance. "You'll stay lay on the other side of the room, Alaric said, his voice low, controlled, carrying the weight of authority that seemed to make the very air between them vibrate. "And if I refuse?" Evelina asked, her tone teasing, though a flicker of uncertainty betrayed her bravado. He stepped closer, boots clicking softly on the stone floor, and leaned slightly against the edge of the table, eyes dark and intense. "Then you'll answer to me," he said, the words firm, yet not unkind. There was a gravity in his voice, a sincerity that belied the playful threat. Evelina's lips curved into a small, almost mischievous smile. "You realize, General, that threats don't work on me." Alaric's lips twitched, barely a smile, though his storm-grey eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Perhaps not," he admitted, "but necessity does." A silence stretched between them, heavy, intimate, filled with the crackle of the fire and the occasional whistle of wind against the window panes. Evelina's gaze wandered over the room, stone walls, heavy wooden beams, shelves lined with books and maps, a sword leaning casually against the corner. Everything here spoke of a man of discipline, of strategy, of battles fought and won. Yet in this quiet she saw the human side of him, the rare vulnerability that only few had glimpsed. "I didn't expect this," she whispered, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "Expect what?" Alaric's tone was curious, almost cautious. "This tenderness, maybe, a human side. I thought a man like you only knew duty, command, war." He stepped closer, the gap narrowing, his presence overwhelming yet magnetic. "And what if I told you," he said, voice softer now, tinged with something unspoken, "that even men like me need moments of quiet?" Evelina swallowed, her heart thudding in her chest. There was something disarming in his honesty, in the fleeting vulnerability she glimpsed behind his stern exterior. She took a small step closer, though still careful, still wary of the power he wielded in every word, every gesture. The night stretched on. Words came and went, soft and measured, with pauses heavy with meaning. They spoke of trivialities at first, weather, town rumors, the festival approaching, but beneath the surface, a deeper dialogue unfolded. Each word, each glance, probing boundaries, testing defenses, building a bridge between two fiercely independent souls. At one point, Evelina caught herself staring. Alaric's jawline, so defined it seemed sculpted from stone, his storm-grey eyes, so sharp yet softened in this intimate space. She looked away quickly, embarrassed, but the pull remained undeniable. "You've been staring," Alaric said suddenly, his voice teasing now, a dangerous lilt of humor threading through it. "I was thinking," she replied quickly, cheeks warming, "about the town and safety, and..." She faltered, realizing she had no proper excuse. Alaric stepped closer, closing the remaining distance, though still careful to respect her space. "Thinking about me?" he asked quietly, and the weight of the question hung between them like the mist outside, tangible and suffocating. Evelina's breath caught. "Perhaps," she admitted, barely above a whisper. The corners of his mouth lifted into a faint private smile. "Dangerous admission," he murmured, voice low, almost vulnerable. "For both of us." The room seemed smaller now, charged with an electricity neither of them could deny. Every glance, every movement was deliberate, every pause pregnant with possibilities. Evelina's heart raced, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of proximity to a man she had been taught to fear and yet could not resist. Hours passed in this slow, intimate dance. No hands touched, no promises were made, yet something significant shifted, a fragile trust, a spark of connection that neither could name. For Alaric, it was a revelation. Desire, yes, but also the first real glimpse of someone who could challenge him, inspire him, and perhaps heal the hidden parts of his heart, long battered by war. For Evelina, it was equally disarming. A man of iron and authority, now a man who could show tenderness, vulnerability, and curiosity, directed entirely at her. When the candle burned low, Alaric finally leaned back in his chair, gaze softening. "Do you know why I commanded you here?" he asked quietly. Evelina shook her head, heart pounding in anticipation. "Not because I wish to control you," he admitted, his voice a whisper now, heavy with sincerity, "but because, in times like these, it's necessary to keep people safe, and sometimes that means keeping someone I care for close, even if they resist." Evelina's throat tightened. Her defenses wavered for the first time. "You care?" she asked, incredulous. "I do," he said simply, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps more than I should, but I cannot deny it." The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced across their faces. In that quiet room, with the night pressing against the windows and the distant town sleeping, two hearts met in unspoken understanding. Not love, not yet, but the seed had been planted, fragile and trembling, yet undeniable. The night drew on, heavy with anticipation, vulnerability, an unspoken desire, and as the first hint of dawn threatened the edges of the world, Evelina Hart and General Alaric Blackthorne remained in quiet companionship, two souls bound by circumstance, curiosity, and the beginning of something neither of them could ignore. Outside, Eastbridge slept, oblivious to the silent storm brewing within a single room, one that would shape the hearts of its two most unlikely occupants forever. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy fog lingering over Eastbridge, casting the town in a grey, ethereal light. Smoke still curled lazily from chimneys, and the scent of wet earth mingled with the faint tang of fire from last night's lamps. The streets were quiet, but the silence felt uneasy, as though the town itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what might come. Alaric rode through the outskirts, inspecting the sentries and patrols with the precision of a man for whom any lapse could mean disaster. His uniform was once again immaculate, the red sash gleaming in the pale morning light, gold braids polished, yet the weight of responsibility pressed heavier than ever, and the memory of Evelina lingered at the edge of his thoughts. Her laughter, her defiance, her fearless gaze, each image flickered like a phantom he could neither chase away nor fully embrace. Meanwhile, Evelina moved through her tavern with a restless energy. Her hands, though busy cleaning and arranging, trembled slightly beneath the surface of calm she projected. Her thoughts were crowded with memories she had long tried to bury, memories that had made her strong, independent, and wary of trusting anyone, especially men of authority. She remembered her father's voice, stern but loving, warning her of the dangers that came with vulnerability. She remembered nights when she had huddled in cold, empty rooms, surviving on sheer grit and cunning. And most of all, She remembered betrayal, friends who had turned on her, lovers who had promised safety only to abandon her at her most desperate hour. A shadow fell across the doorway. Alaric had entered without knocking, his presence filling the room with a quiet authority that left her both tense and inexplicably aware of him. "Evelina," he said softly, though there was an edge to his voice. "You were distant this morning. What haunts you?" She stiffened, setting a mug down with deliberate care. "Haunts me?" she asked, turning sharply. "I live in a town under siege. There are threats around every corner. I have every reason to be cautious." Alaric's eyes narrowed slightly, and he stepped closer. "I mean the shadows you carry from before this town, before the war, the ones you don't share with anyone." Her breath caught. No one had ever asked her that before, at least not with sincerity. She wanted to push him away, to retreat into the walls she had built over years of survival, but something in his eyes, something raw, unguarded, made her hesitate. "I survived because I had no choice," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempts at composure. "Because no one could protect me, not even someone like you." Alaric's expression softened, a rare vulnerability surfacing in his storm-grey eyes. "I don't know how to protect people who push me away," he admitted quietly. Her lips trembled, and for the first time she allowed a flicker of vulnerability to show. "Maybe some people aren't meant to be protected," she said almost to herself. He stepped closer, close enough that the warmth from his body brushed against her arm, yet careful not to overstep. "I disagree," he said firmly. "Some people deserve protection, even if they refuse it. You're one of them." The room seemed to shrink around them, the fire's glow dancing across their faces. In that moment, words weren't enough. Their eyes spoke a language neither had learned to say aloud. Trust, curiosity, a fragile hope that something more might exist between them. But the past, as always, had a way of intruding. A messenger arrived, breathless, bearing news that set Alaric's jaw tight. Rebel activity had been spotted just beyond the river, scouts reporting unusual movement in the forest surrounding the town. The threat was real, immediate, and dangerous. Evelina watched him transform in an instant, from the man she had seen vulnerable, questioning, almost human, to the general, commander of men, strategist, protector. His posture stiffened, eyes hardening, mind calculating. The pull between them didn't vanish, but it was temporarily drowned out by duty. "You must leave," Alaric said gently, though firmly, motioning toward her door. "It's not safe here, not with scouts reported so close." "I won't hide," she said stubbornly, stepping closer. "If danger comes to this town, I'll be part of it. I know these streets better than anyone." Alaric's storm-grey eyes softened once more. He knew her resolve was unyielding, but he could not help the swell of admiration and the faint, dangerous swell of desire he felt for a woman who refused to be controlled, who faced danger head-on, and yet in moments like these allowed herself to be human. "Then we face it together," he said finally, a rare admission of partnership and trust. The day passed with careful tension, each moment a balancing act between war, strategy, and the unspoken bond growing between them. Alaric found himself drawn to her more than he expected, captivated not only by her strength and courage, but also by the glimpses of vulnerability she allowed him to see. Evelina, in turn, could not ignore the stirrings in her chest, a strange combination of respect, curiosity, and a desire she had long suppressed for fear of betrayal. As night fell, Eastbridge once again was cloaked in mist, the streets whispering with secrets and danger. Alaric and Evelina met briefly in the tavern, their hands brushing lightly, a fleeting contact that sent shivers down both their spines. Neither spoke of it, but both felt the undeniable shift, trust, connection, and a spark that had been set by fire the night before, now growing quietly but inexorably. And as they parted, each carried the knowledge that shadows of the past were not the only things shaping them. In this fragile town, amidst whispers of war and the encroaching danger of rebellion, something new was being forged, a bond between two fiercely independent souls, one that neither could yet name, and one that might just define their future. Chapter 4: The Dance of Desire. The winter festival transformed Eastbridge into a realm of light and color, a temporary escape from the tension and shadow that lingered over the town. Lanterns swayed above the cobblestone streets, casting golden and crimson hues across the frost-tipped roofs. Music spilled from every corner, a mixture of flutes, drums, and the laughter of children bundled in warm coats. For the townsfolk, it was a night of joy, a chance to forget fear, even if only for a few hours. Alaric walked through the streets alongside Evelina, the general's presence a striking contrast to the revelry. His uniform was formal, polished to an almost ceremonial gleam, yet the hard edges of his posture softened in the festival lights. Evelina, in a woolen cloak over her usual tavern attire, moved with a careful grace, her eyes taking in the lantern-lit streets with wonder she rarely allowed herself. "You look different in the moonlight," Alaric said, his voice low, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile spell of the evening. "And you look human," Evelina teased, a playful glint in her sapphire eyes. Her cheeks warmed despite the cold. "I never thought I'd see the fearsome General Blackthorn laughing at children's antics." He allowed himself a small private smile. "I laugh rarely," he admitted, "but tonight I suppose even I can appreciate lightness when it's fleeting." The two of them moved among the crowds, drawn together by some unspoken gravity. The smell of roasting chestnuts and mulled cider mingled with the crisp winter air. Evelina's hand brushed against Alaric's accidentally, or perhaps deliberately, and the warmth of his grip lingered far longer than necessary. A spark ignited, subtle and insistent, that neither dared to name. A fiddler began a lively tune, and couples took to the street for dancing. Evelina laughed softly, eyes alight with mischief. "Do you dance, General? I follow orders on the battlefield," he replied dryly, but his tone carried an uncharacteristic challenge. "But I've never refused a dance." Her laughter rang out, clear and musical, as she allowed him to take her hand. The music pulled them into a swirl of movement, the crowd around them fading until only the space between their bodies mattered. Every step, every turn was charged with tension, their movements a delicate negotiation between desire and restraint. "You move like a man accustomed to command," Evelina teased, letting her hand rest lightly on his shoulder for a fleeting moment. "And you move like a woman who refuses to be tamed," Alaric countered, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "A dangerous combination." Her pulse quickened. "Perhaps that's exactly what you need, General." The dance continued, each turn drawing them closer. Evelina felt the heat of his body, the controlled power in his arms, the slow but undeniable pull of something more than simple attraction. Alaric, in turn, found himself disarmed by her audacity, by the spark in her eyes, by the way she refused to be merely an observer in his carefully controlled world. For a moment the world felt suspended. The music, the laughter, the flickering lanterns all became a backdrop to a connection neither had expected to feel so strongly, so quickly. But even as their hearts raced, the shadow of danger lingered. Alaric's gaze flickered toward the edges of the crowd, alert to the faintest sign of trouble. Rebel spies had been reported nearby in recent days, and the general could not ignore even a hint of threat, even in this brief reprieve. "You're distracted," Evelina whispered, sensing the shift. "I cannot forget the town's safety," he admitted quietly. "Even here, amid celebration, my duty calls." Her hand lingered on his arm, a grounding touch. "Then let me help," she said softly. "Not just with the town, but with you. Let me remind you there's more to life than war." Alaric's jaw tightened, torn between desire and responsibility. "Perhaps you're right," he said finally, his storm-grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest flutter. "Perhaps this night allows us a brief surrender to what we feel, not what we command." As the dance ended, Alaric bowed slightly, his hand brushing hers in a lingering, intimate gesture. Evelina's heart hammered, and though she stepped back, the warmth of his touch remained, a silent promise of the connection building between them. Later, as they walked through the quiet streets leading back to the inn, Evelina looked up at him. "Do you ever imagine a life without duty, without constant command?" she asked, voice soft. Alaric considered her, eyes distant for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "though it's fleeting, duty is part of who I am. Yet tonight, perhaps, I've glimpsed another possibility." Their eyes met, and for the first time neither spoke of strategy, rebellion, or past scars. In that shared silence, there was understanding, trust, and the quiet birth of something neither could yet name. The festival lights faded behind them, leaving only the misty streets of Eastbridge, but the spark between Evelina and Alaric burned brighter, a fragile flame amidst the encroaching shadows, a flame that would be tested in the days to come, as love and danger began their dangerous, inevitable dance. Chapter 5. Secrets Unveiled. The dawn was pale and cold, the kind of winter morning that wrapped Eastbridge in a brittle silence. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the distant clatter of boots on cobblestones sounded sharper than usual. The town seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that something pivotal was about to unfold. Alaric moved through the streets with the same precision that defined him, inspecting the soldiers and sentries. Every detail mattered: the position of a guard, the spacing of patrols, the faintest sign of intrusion. The rebels had grown bolder, and intelligence reports indicated that their plans were no longer idle threats. Eastbridge was a town on a knife's edge, and Alaric's mind was a storm of calculations and contingencies. Evelina had arrived at the tavern early, her usual confident composure masking a deeper turmoil. For years she had hidden a secret, knowledge that could shift the balance of power in Eastbridge. Her father, once a strategist of some renown, had shared with her the movements, codes, and patterns of the insurgent groups before his untimely death. She had kept it hidden, fearing the weight of responsibility and the danger it could bring, not just to herself, but to those around her. But now, with Alaric's arrival and the rebels' audacity growing by the day, hiding it was no longer an option. He entered the tavern, eyes scanning the room, but immediately settling on her. "You seem distracted," he said quietly, taking a seat at the counter. "I have information," she replied, her voice tight with a mix of anxiety and resolve. She reached into her cloak and retrieved a small, leather-bound notebook, worn from years of handling. The edges of the pages were frayed, and the ink, though faded, still held clarity. Alaric's brow rose, curiosity piqued. "Information, yes," Evelina said, placing the notebook on the counter between them. "About the rebels, about their plans. I've kept this hidden for years. I thought it was safer that way, but now it could save the town." Alaric's hand hovered over the notebook, his storm-grey eyes narrowing as he processed the significance. "You mean you've known more than you've told me? I couldn't risk it falling into the wrong hands," she admitted, her sapphire eyes meeting his. "Not even yours at first. I didn't trust anyone fully, not after everything I've seen." He leaned back, running a hand over his jaw. "And now," she said, her voice firm, "I trust you, not just as the general, but as someone who has shown he might understand the weight of responsibility and the cost of secrets." Alaric's eyes softened, and for a moment he allowed himself a rare vulnerability. "I won't betray that trust," he promised. "Whatever it takes, Eastbridge will be safe, and I will not let harm come to you, Evelina." A quiet tension hung between them, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. The walls they had both built, Alaric's of authority and Evelina's of survival, began to shift under the weight of trust, the fragile intimacy of shared secrets. Together they pored over the notebook. Evelina traced routes through the forest, safe houses used by the rebels, and codes she had memorized as a child. Alaric absorbed every detail with a strategist's precision, his mind racing to formulate a plan that would protect the town without endangering its people. "You've done more than anyone could have expected," he said finally, closing the notebook. "You've given us a chance, Evelina, a real chance." Her lips trembled into a faint, almost shy smile. "I hope it's enough." Alaric reached out, his hand brushing hers over the worn leather cover. The touch was brief, deliberate, electric. "It will be enough," he said quietly, "because we face it together." For the first time, Evelina allowed herself to feel something beyond fear and duty, hope, and alongside it a burgeoning trust in a man who had not only demanded obedience, but had shown a capacity for understanding, respect, and even something like care. But the moment was fleeting. Outside, a distant horn echoed, a warning. The rebels had been spotted moving closer to the town's edge, faster and more organized than intelligence had suggested. Alaric's hand tightened on the notebook, his jaw firm. "Prepare yourself," he said, voice low but commanding. "Tonight we take action, and we do so with precision." Evelina met his gaze, her pulse quickening, not just from the impending danger, but from the closeness between them, the shared burden and the unspoken understanding that neither would face the coming night alone. As the day drew on, Eastbridge seemed to hold its breath, a town poised on the brink of chaos. But in the quiet corners of the tavern, amidst maps and whispered strategies, Alaric and Evelina forged a bond that would not be broken, not by war, not by fear, and not even by their own defenses. The night promised danger, deception, and choices that would test courage and hearts alike. But it also promised clarity. Trust was a weapon, and in each other they had found one powerful enough to face whatever shadows lurked beyond the town walls. Chapter 6. Battle of Hearts and Honor. Night had fallen over Eastbridge like a velvet curtain, heavy and suffocating. The mist that clung to the streets earlier in the day had thickened, turning familiar alleys into shifting shadows, and the soft glow of lanterns barely penetrated the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then silence, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Alaric stood atop the inn's balcony, his storm-grey eyes scanning the perimeter. Every patrol, every sentry, every whispered report ran through his mind with precise calculations. Yet even amidst the strategy, his thoughts kept returning to Evelina. She had insisted on remaining in the town during the battle, refusing to hide behind walls or flee to safety. His instincts screamed that she should have stayed behind, but her defiance, her courage, was part of what drew him to her, and he could not punish her for it. "General," a sentry whispered, voice tense, "they're approaching the southern edge. At least 50 strong, armed and fast." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Signal the men, form the perimeter. No one moves without my order." His hand brushed the hilt of his sword, worn leather comforting beneath his fingers. Inside the tavern, Evelina moved with quiet efficiency, helping barricade doors and windows, organizing townsfolk to safety, and relaying Alaric's orders. Her sapphire eyes burned with resolve, heart pounding with adrenaline and fear she refused to acknowledge aloud. Yet every glance toward the inn's balcony, where Alaric stood commanding, sent a thrill through her, a dangerous mixture of admiration, desire, and trust. Then the first horn sounded, low and guttural, signaling the rebels' arrival. The ground seemed to shiver beneath the sound, the mist swirling like a living creature around the town. Shadows moved at the edges of the fog, figures cloaked in black, advancing with calculated purpose. Alaric drew his sword, its edge gleaming in the flickering lantern light. Every movement, every command was precise, a dance of control and strategy, honed through years of battle. And then he saw her, Evelina, moving swiftly among the townsfolk, her courage unyielding, her presence a beacon. "Stay close," he ordered, not as a command but as a plea. "I won't hide," she shot back, eyes blazing. "Not from this, not from you." The first clash erupted at the southern gate. Alaric moved like a force of nature, every swing of his blade calculated, every strike decisive. Evelina followed as best she could, guiding townsfolk through safe exits, improvising defenses, and even wielding a short dagger with surprising skill when rebels breached the inn's outer courtyard. Time stretched, moments folding into one another. The sound of steel against steel, cries of men and women, the hiss of arrows and the crackle of fire. Each sensation was heightened, electric, terrifying, and yet exhilarating. Amidst the chaos, Alaric found Evelina, guiding a frightened child through a side alley. "Evelina!" he called, voice strained over the clamor. She turned, eyes wide, then smiled briefly despite the terror. "I told you I wouldn't hide." He grabbed her hand, grounding her, holding her close for a heartbeat, as if the mere touch could shield them both. The warmth of her skin against his, and the steadiness of her grip, was a rare comfort in the maelstrom. "You're reckless," he said, voice low but edged with relief. "And you're overprotective," she teased, though her chest heaved with exhaustion and adrenaline. A sudden surge of rebels broke through the northern barricade, forcing Alaric and Evelina back toward the inn's courtyard. Side by side they fought, not just as general and civilian, but as partners, instinctively moving in harmony. Every glance, every touch, every coordinated maneuver built unspoken trust and a bond forged in fire. At one point, Alaric was struck by a glancing blow, his shoulder burning, but Evelina acted instantly, catching a falling rebel's weapon and deflecting it with a sharp twist. His gaze found hers, stormy yet tender, and for a fleeting moment the battle faded. In the chaos, there was only the electricity between them, their breaths, their movements, their silent understanding that they were in this together. By dawn, Eastbridge stood battered but unbroken. The rebels had been driven away, retreating into the forest from which they came, leaving behind smoke, debris, and a town scarred but alive. Alaric and Evelina stood amidst the ruins, the morning sun piercing the mist, painting the streets in gold. They were covered in soot and blood, not all their own, but their hands found each other, fingers entwining instinctively. "You should have stayed behind," Alaric murmured, his voice a mix of frustration, relief, and unspoken emotion. "And let you face this alone?" Evelina countered, leaning into him, letting herself be grounded by his presence. Never. For the first time, words felt unnecessary. The town, scarred and breathing, seemed to echo the same sentiment. They had survived together, fought side by side, and in doing so, revealed a truth neither could deny. Their bond had been forged in fire, unshakable, and filled with a tension that would not fade. Alaric's hand found her cheek, brushing soot-streaked hair back, his thumb lingering against her skin. "You are reckless," he whispered, voice low, almost a confession. "And you are dangerous," she replied softly, eyes locked on his, the adrenaline of the night mingling with something far more intimate. The sun rose fully now, illuminating a town ready to rebuild, and two hearts irrevocably altered by the night's trials. Amidst the battle's aftermath, amidst the scars and the smoke, Alaric and Evelina discovered something more potent than fear or duty, something that had survived the clash of swords and the chaos of war. Each other. Chapter 7. Dawn of a New Beginning. The first light of dawn stretched over Eastbridge, gilding the cobblestone streets in a soft golden haze. Smoke still lingered faintly in the morning air, the remnants of the previous night's battle. But the town was alive with cautious hope. Windows were being repaired, fires rekindled, and townsfolk moved with a quiet determination, repairing damage and tending to the wounded. Life, stubborn and unbroken, had returned. Alaric walked through the streets, sword sheathed, shoulders slightly relaxed for the first time in days. The victory had been hard won, lives had been lost, courage tested, and the town left scarred. But amidst the ruin, a sense of renewal shimmered. Children ran past him, laughing despite the lingering fear, and vendors tentatively reopened stalls, their voices tentative songs of normalcy. Evelina waited near the blue lantern, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, hair still mussed from the chaos of battle. She had worked tirelessly through the night, helping the wounded, organizing food and supplies, and ensuring the town had the best chance to recover. Yet now, as she watched Alaric approach, Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with a wave of emotions she could no longer ignore. Relief, pride, desire, and something far deeper swirled within her. "You survived," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of incredulity and warmth. "I did," Alaric replied, his storm-grey eyes locking with her sapphire ones. "Because of you." His hand brushed against hers briefly, grounding them both. The gesture, simple yet intimate, spoke volumes of shared danger and trust. Evelina's lips curved into a small, relieved smile. "We survived together." The streets were quiet now, the town slowly stirring back to life. Alaric stepped closer, his presence commanding yet gentle. "Evelina," he said, voice low, carrying both authority and vulnerability, "I would be a fool to let you remain just a part of my nights or my thoughts. You've proven courage, wit, and strength beyond measure. His voice faltered slightly, rare vulnerability breaking through the general's iron facade. "You?" Evelina prompted, eyes searching his face for the truth he often hid behind stoic discipline. He took a deep breath, closing the gap between them. "I cannot imagine facing what's ahead, town, battles, or even life, without you by my side. Not just for one night, not just for this town, but for me." Evelina's heart thumped painfully, and in that moment, she allowed herself to set aside fear and doubt. "And I cannot imagine it without you," she whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek. Her fingers lingered, tracing the line of his jaw, and he leaned into the touch, a rare softness breaking through the general's usual restraint. The sun rose fully now, bathing the two in warmth. Alaric's hand found hers, fingers entwining effortlessly, a symbol of mutual trust and choice. There was no need for formalities or proclamations. The bond forged through danger, trust, and shared vulnerability had spoken for them. "I suppose," Alaric said softly, almost teasing despite the gravity of the moment, "that my original command, to share a room for one night, has turned into something far more enduring." Evelina laughed, a light, joyful sound that had been absent for far too long. "Far more enduring indeed," she agreed, stepping closer until their foreheads touched, breaths mingling, hearts aligned. For a long moment, they simply stood together, the town of Eastbridge beginning to stir around them, the mist lifting, the sun brightening every corner. In that quiet, golden morning, there were no orders, no battles, no shadows from the past. Only two people who had survived, loved, and chosen each other. Alaric pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a vow without words, and she responded with a soft, reassuring smile. The world beyond the town could wait. For now, the dawn marked a beginning, a new chapter for Eastbridge, and for the general and the woman who had stolen his heart in a single, fateful night. Together, they walked down the cobblestone streets, hands entwined, stepping into the promise of a future they would face not as commander and civilian, but as equals, partners in love, life, and every battle to come. The wind carried the scent of new beginnings, and for the first time in years, Alaric allowed himself to believe that perhaps even a man of war could find peace and a heart worth protecting beyond the battlefield.